Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 390 featuring Justin Mitchell, VFX supervisor over at Scanline VFX. I had not actually met Justin until I recorded this podcast. He is a super nice guy, but he has been at Scanline for 14 years, definitely has a lot of experience in that area working for Scanline, and it was really great connecting with him and finding out more about all the cool stuff that they do at Scanline. Obviously, we've had people from there on before, but it was really cool to hear Justin's perspective, and he's done such great work there, right, Kristen?
Oh yeah, his story is interesting. He went from acting school to being a visual effects supervisor. So that's a very interesting transition. He kind of explains that and how it actually helped him with being a VFX soup. So that's awesome. And then just the movies he's worked on, from Final Destination 2, Elf, Super 8. It's a lot of like Marvel films, and now Stranger Things 4, which you guys get into a little bit in this episode. And his view on like how he manages his team. He says he allows his team to have influence on like what they are creating, but also, communicating the vision of the filmmakers. So they all have a collective goal, but he does empower like his team to kind of create, not just push pixels. So that's kind of awesome to hear about. And then you also ask him, like, how do you take like a very vague description of something and turn it into, what we're viewing? And he kind of goes into that and how he does like a lot of reference and style boards. So get to hear about that. And then at the end, you guys also talk about like all the episodic work and how it's changed from his early days to now. So, we get a lot in this episode.
We do. We really get into it with Justin. And that's actually one of my favorite questions to ask certain visual effects artists, especially those who do things that are simulation based or things of that nature, that the descriptions are hard to come by, vague descriptions. And then a real talented person in visual effects has the ability to interpret that in some ways or finds ways to get the right description out. So it's really cool to do that. And like you said, he's done amazing work, and it's really cool to see the stuff, especially the cool things on Stranger Things season 4 that they did over there. So really nice to hear about that. Okay, we've got a couple of announcements. So you can find us at chaos.com. The first one, obviously, is that V-Ray 6 for 3ds Max is out. That's been out for several weeks. But more importantly, actually, the public betas for other versions of V-Ray 6 are out as well. Maya is on the public beta, so go check that out if you'd like to find out more about what's going on in Maya. And then we also just recently released this V-Ray 6 for SketchUp and for Rhino. So go check those all out at chaos.com. If you have a license, you can check out the public beta and give us your feedback, which is the most important thing of a beta to do. Perfect. Now we have a couple events going on. What's happening?
Yeah, so you can find these out at chaos.com/events. The first one is, we've been talking about it for a while. It is September 8th and 9th, and it's 24 hours of chaos. So we have, it's all online, and it's 24 hours, and it's a series of 12 back-to-back shows, with 3D artists, designers, VFX, archivists, animation, gaming, so everyone around the world. It's really awesome, but you can find that out, and it's a long one, chaos.com/24-hours-chaos. But if you just look 24 hours of chaos up, you'll find it.
Perfect. Yes, it's a lot of fun. I always love doing this every year. Our show, the LA time zone show, shall we say, West Coast time show, is it's pretty cool. It's going to be, I know that there's some great talks going on, and I'm going to finally get the opportunity to show you guys what I've been doing with some virtual production stuff, including some really cool stuff with Vantage, which I'm excited to share with you. So make sure and check it out. Go to chaos.com/events for 24 hours of chaos. But this is not the only event we have. We have other things going on. What's happening, Kristen?
Yeah, so on September 15th through 16th, it will be 3D Basecamp in Poland. And then right after that, you will be going to THU again, and that's Malta this year, correct?
No, it's back in Portugal. So it's going to be
okay.
It's going to be in Troy. I'm very excited. I'm going to be recording a bunch of podcasts and meeting with a bunch of people there. I have not been able to really go to an event really since the pandemic. So I'm very excited to go back to THU. So if any of you guys are going to THU, make sure and hit me up, and I would love to chat and catch up while we're both in Troya. And we have one more event. What else is happening?
One more. So at the end of September, September 26th through 30th, we will have 3D Basecamp in Vancouver. So you can join Chaos and Inkscape to discover our latest latest additions to SketchUp, and Lon will be there, so
Yep.
find him.
There's going to be a lot of cool stuff happening over there, so go check it out, September 26th through 30th. And all of this can be found at chaos.com/events, so make sure to remember that if you want to remember where all these dates and locations will be. Great. Now, if people want to know more about the podcast, Kristen, where can they go?
You can go to facebook.com/CG Garage Podcast or chaos.com/CG Garage. And if you'd like to watch us, go to youtube.com/Chaos Group TV.
Perfect. Again, if you have any suggestions or ideas or feedback on any of the podcasts, love to hear from you. labs@chaos.com is our email. Again, that is labs@chaos.com. But for now, please enjoy episode number 390 with Justin Mitchell.
Welcome to another CG Garage where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passe. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
Obviously, you're very successful VFX supervisor over at Scanline. You're doing some amazing stuff, but I always want to know people's origin stories, and they're always so interesting. So what sort of got you into computer graphics and doing the kind of things that you do now?
So I actually went to college to be an actor, but after auditioning and not really having any success, I migrated into lighting in film and television. And I never really worked on a lot of big productions, but I worked on a lot of B movies.
Okay.
And after a while, I got tired of lugging 20 Ks up a wet hill at 5 o'clock in the morning. And I figured, I got to do something else with my life. So I've always loved computer graphics and computer animation, and I was always interested in drama and storytelling for sure, which is why I studied to be an actor. So animation seemed to be like a really good fit. It seemed to be a way to make a good living, still doing the storytelling and filmmaking that I aspired to do, but in a bit of a different way. So we started out in television, got my first gig doing a night shift, actually, and working in 3D Studio Max at Hollywood Digital West.
Right.
And I was doing a show called The Invisible Man primarily. We did some commercials and that kind of thing as well. Worked on Charmed and some other sort of series like that. So really like quick day turnaround shots, which was great for really cutting my teeth in visual effects. I really learned how to track, how to light, how to composite, like really the whole gamut, which I didn't know it at the time, but has since really served me as a VFX supervisor because I have a very broad understanding of the whole effects process. So it really helps in talking to artists, but also knowing how to lie, cheat, and steal where needed in order to get the end result in a timely and cost-efficient manner without necessarily sacrificing a cool looking shot.
But generalists were really big in the episodic world back then. But what's interesting is that the generalist concept is popular again. I think a lot of people are looking at generalists as people who can really sort of create something from all pieces and make it more efficient in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think it's of great value. I love working with generalists, and I think we kind of moved into a paradigm at least in tentpole feature production, where people became very, very specialized, and they work on a small piece of the production pipeline, tiny oftentimes, and then so if they're asked to do something outside their tool set, they become very sort of challenged. And that definitely has its place, in a big production pipeline for sure. But there is a lot to be said for someone that is a jack of many trades and perhaps a master of just two or three. Because when you have to kick things to other departments, that takes time.
Right.
And that can often slow down, particularly when you're churning and burning. I mean, Stranger Things season 4 definitely has bigger budgets than many episodic television shows do, but even still, relative to like a tentpole feature film, it's different. You just don't have as much time, so you need to produce a lot of content very quickly and efficiently.
Right. Okay, so you cut your teeth over at Hollywood Digital West, right? That was a pretty cool place back in the day.
Yeah. Eventually it became Encore. I moved to Encore. And from there, I went to Digital Dimension, which was like a smaller shop in the boutique kind of shop in the Valley, where 3D Studio Max was really like the render, the package of choice, and V-Ray was the render of choice. And
I believe one of the first movies to really sort of use V-Ray was actually from Digital Dimension, and it was Final Destination 2, I think.
Yeah, Final Destination. Yeah,
Right.
I worked on Final Destination. Yeah, with all of the shots of like the logs like coming off the truck and bouncing on the ground and stuff. Yeah, I worked
so that was one of
shots.
the first things done in V-Ray in a feature film.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's certainly grown a lot since then, and now it's everywhere, which is great because it's an awesome tool. So, so I spent, I think, about 7 years at Digital Dimension, and then I left for a year, and I went to a small house that does kind of made-for-TV movies called Larry Levinson Productions, and that was just a sort of short stint, but I got some experience as a VFX supervisor there. Before moving on and joining Scanline in 2009, I think it was. And 2012 was the first show I worked on there. When I joined Scanline in Los Angeles, I think we were about 10 people. And though they had some history in Germany, to be sure. And now we're 1,300 people or something like that worldwide. We've got offices all around the world. So things have changed. We've grown a lot, but it's been a fun ride.
Right. So since you were at the sort of at the very beginnings of the Scanline, at least the LA presence, as you mentioned, I mean, how well did you get to know and work with Flowline and some of the things that's with obviously all their fluid stuff?
Very well. Yeah. So I really, my work at Scanline, I worked as an effects TD initially. So I'd done some of that at Digital Dimension, thinking particles, and fume effects, tools like that. But of course, when I came to Scanline, I did a lot of thinking particles work, but I also did quite a lot of Flowline work. We went through some training. It started really in 2012 doing like big fluid sims and so at the time it was definitely cutting edge, state of the art fluid software, and we've continued to develop it, but a lot of other tool sets have grown since then.
Well, I think it'd be great. I mean, I obviously know what Flowline is, and I've been working. Chaos has been working with you guys specifically to integrate itself into Flowline. But can you explain a little bit, for the audience, what is in Flowline and why is it special, and what made it so important when it started, and obviously it still is very important today?
Yeah. So Flowline is it's a fluid effects system. So it's for doing water and smoke and fire and things of that nature. I think what makes Flowline unique and what really made it powerful at the time was that its ability to divide sims across multiple machines and do huge calculations with hundreds of millions of particles across the network. So really, we were able to do fluids on a scale that most people could not, because computationally it's very expensive, and the amount of RAM that was required was very extreme. So a lot of our success and the power of Flowline related to its connection to the network and the render farm or the simulation farm in this case.
Right. And I think I remember, Scanline in LA for an office that wasn't that big had a huge amount of computer power that they were using, right?
Yes.
So that was one of the investments that Stefan made, right? Is that you looked at that.
Yes. Yeah. It was really, it was such an important part of the equation, really. So we invested heavily in infrastructure. And that allowed us to sort of iterate. To me, quality on feature films or television or really any visual effects is very much connected to iterations. The more times you can turn something around, the better it looks. So yeah, it's paramount to have enough computing power to be able to run sims over and over again till you get the right result.
Yeah. And how hard is it to get the right sim?
It's pretty tricky sometimes. I mean, over the years you kind of learn some tricks to get there. But I've often described my job to people as like standing at the top of the staircase with a ball, and there's like a cup at the bottom of the staircase, and you're trying to get the ball to land in the cup by bouncing it down the steps. And so it takes a lot of tries to get there, and you sort of play around with, maybe I bounce it off the wall, maybe it's 2 bounces, maybe it's 5 bounces. Yeah, so there's like there's part of it that's calculated, there's part of it that's accidental magic that happens. And it's really about learning how to nudge. Like simulation, you don't really have explicit control. Of course, we design things and ultimately get the result that we want, but it's really more like guiding the simulation rather than explicitly driving it.
And what about direction? Like, for example, there's always a struggle between certain directors, for example, say, no, I wanted to do this. It's like, but, well, is it possible to do that?
Yeah. Sometimes sometimes it may not be possible or realistic. But you have to find a way. And sometimes you have to just interpret a note that asks you to do something and that might not be physically plausible, but you need to, rather than be literal, capture the essence of that note and say, well, they're looking for energy. They're looking for some big explosive moment. It's not really important that it hits right here in this moment, Yeah,
so. That's definitely. I've always had a fascination with fluid sims and different types of simulations that happen, and because it's so hard to direct that, it's always been something that I've been curious about. And sometimes things get art directed into not looking real, and those are very challenging to deal with.
Yeah, sometimes people can be their own worst enemy.
Absolutely. Okay, well, tell us a little bit about, obviously since 2009, that's quite a long time. Obviously, you're coming up on 13 years at Scanline, right?
Yeah.
So that's quite
I'm an old dog now.
quite a stint. Okay, well, tell us a little bit about some of your favorite projects that you worked on.
Let's see. Well, 2012 was a great one. I mean, really, like we were doing stuff that just kind of hadn't been seen before. So that
you're doing the big
awesome.
ships that goes into the water, and I'm assuming those. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. And like giant waves crashing into the White House and over the Himalayas and all of that kind of thing. So that was a lot of fun. Let's see, I worked on Iron Man 3 was a cool one that I have a lot of fun memories about. I was a CG supervisor on that. In that, we worked on a lot of different parts of it, but we did the sequence where the helicopters attacked Tony's mansion in
Yeah.
in Malibu. So all of these rockets come in, and the mansion basically collapses or partially collapses, and then half of it slides down the hill and goes
Right.
into the drink. So yeah, that was one of my first shows as a CG supervisor. That was when I sort of got to wear a bit of a different hat. So that was fun. Let's see. I think Tomb Raider
Nice.
was another really
Yeah.
fun one that we did. Lara falls into a river and is washed downstream towards a waterfall, and ultimately grabs onto a plane, like an old plane. I think it was like a World War II plane that had crashed years ago and was all rusted out and decaying, and precariously positioned at the edge of this waterfall. And she manages to grab onto it rather than going over the edge of the waterfall. But that it's an old plane, so it's sort of collapsing
Right.
underneath her. So that was a fun show. A lot of environment work on that, and of course some Flowline
Right.
work.
One of my favorite sequences, I mean, there's lots of sequences, obviously, a Scanline that I adore, but one of my favorite one that always stuck out to me, and I just think of it every time, is the train sequence in Super 8. I don't know if you had worked on that one as well.
Right. Yeah, I did. I did a lot of thinking particles work of like as the train crashes and debris shoots up into the
Right.
air, as well as like a lot of Flowline work in that too. With for that we did a lot of fire sims, dirt sims that were done in Flowline as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was definitely a fun one.
Great. So obviously you said you started over at Scanline when there was 10 people, and now there's 1,300 people and many offices, and company has grown quite a bit. Yeah. So
Something like
what
that.
what have
Yes,
you
yes.
how has that growth affected you and affected the company? How have you noticed changes in general over that time?
So it's, I mean, I've obviously grown into new roles, so that's been a big change for me. I'm still actually on the box sometimes. I like to get my hands dirty, and it's a strange sort of meditation to do some shot work as well. So even on Stranger Things, I did some shot work. Though I certainly don't do as
Right.
much as I used to. So for me, I've really learned a whole new set of skills, and I'm definitely still evolving. It's one thing to be a good artist, but it's a very different thing to be a good supervisor. And I don't even know if I am a good supervisor, but I think I make pretty shots, but the management of people is still an ever evolving skill that I learn more each show, to be sure. So it's really about how to get the best out of people within the constraints of their skills and the time frame and the budgets and all of that kind
And
of thing.
how has that been challenging for you to do
know-
that? And what were this, to think about directing people? And
Yeah, I think so. I think I wasn't I'm not I'm not a inherently gregarious person, and I think that I think leading people and inspiring them was a personal challenge for me, and I had to kind of find my own way to do it. I think that was important for me to accept that I'm not like some other supervisors who I admired. You could kind of find your own way, and obviously in the visual effects world, there's a lot of socially awkward people, and I probably am one of those people, and fit into that group. And I think as long as you're honest about who you are and fair with people, it all works out.
I'm sure,
end of
but
the day.
you know, you're.
So yeah, so still evolving, but
What was your first show that you supervised? You were a VFX supervisor at Scanline.
so it was actually television. It was Cosmos. It was the latest
Right.
season of Cosmos with Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah.
And I worked on that with Jeff Oken. He was the client side supervisor.
Nice.
Jeff, who was one of the founders of the VES. So that was a real treasure to get to meet and work with him. Yeah, and it was a fun show because there was a lot of diverse effects. We did some sort of planetary type work. There was a whole kind of frozen planet of Enceladus that we did, where we sort of dove down into these sort of subterranean caverns and really explored the origins of life, with all of these sort of microbes forming at the bottom of oceans. And there was some work with what are they called now? The worms that basically like sea worms, I think they were called, or something like that are swimming around. Some of the earliest sort of forms of life. Yeah, so that was, and then we did a whole thing with mycelium, which is this sort of connective fibrous tissue that's connected to mushrooms and is a bit of a like a network that moves under the ground that allows plants to communicate with each other.
Right.
So yeah, it was a fun show because it was diverse. There was a lot of different types of effects. Really kind of took me back to my roots of being fast turnaround, a lot of quick and dirty tricks, both in 3D and in compositing, to get the job done.
That's cool. That's cool. I love those types of things. And I've always been a big fan of Cosmos, and Neil deGrasse Tyson was a great person. Did you get to work with him more directly?
No,
or
I
did
didn't.
You
I never
not?
got to meet
Right.
Neil. No.
Okay.
But yeah, he's a
Fascinating.
cool cat. I like Neil.
He is. I was just watching him trying to explain to people why the importance of the James Webb telescope images.
Oh yeah, that's so amazing.
Yeah.
I was just looking at that last night. It is. It's mind-boggling what we're going to discover from that. It's so cool.
I was trying to understand it, and I realized like the curve is like the bending of space that we're seeing in those galaxies.
Yeah, super cool.
Crazy.
Yeah, and amazing to think about. I was talking to my wife about that, and they were talking about how the images are actually of things that are billions of years ago, right? And she's like, "How can that be?" I'm like, "Well, that light took that long to get to the camera. That's just how long it takes." Yeah. So we're really looking
at a time
history.
machine.
It could set us up for disappointment, though. I can imagine we see some sort of alien life form out there, only to realize that they went extinct a few million years ago. Let's hope not. But yeah, that's awesome. I'm a big fan of science, so that's great.
That's awesome. Well, let me ask you this. You mentioned you went to school for acting, and that was something you were interested in doing. Have you felt that some of those things that you've been doing for acting has helped in a lot of ways? I can imagine as a VFX supervisor, being able to give direction and understanding things on how things need to be, maybe some of those acting skills or things you learned in acting has contributed to that.
Yeah, they actually have, I think, strange as it might sound. Certainly I did a lot of lighting when I was in acting school too. When you're putting on plays, you don't really have a whole crew to do all of the stage work for you. So I got familiar with lighting and 3-point lighting, and as I mentioned, I did that in some film and television as well. So that definitely has served me, because really, and there's one of the things that drew me to 3D animation and visual effects is that it's basically like a stage, like the viewport into 3D Studio Max or Maya or whatever is basically like a stage, and you're just dressing it with props and setting up lights and telling a little story. So from that standpoint, that experience definitely helped me. but even really from a storytelling or directing standpoint, I think it really serves. Like one of the things that people don't think enough about when designing visual effects shots is that they're really stories. Like you're telling a story even in a single shot, and that might sound like I'm kind of trying to make a bit of a meal out of it, but it's really true that even in the simplest sense, if like let's say that it's about a wave that's barreling down a street. Well, a wave barreling down a street is kind of vague and unachievable and really not that interesting to look at. You need to create moments for the audience to follow, and you need to tell a little bit of a story. So the wave then smashes into a vendor's cart, and then it turns around a corner, and then a couple of cars narrowly miss crashing into that wave, but because the wave is there, the car like goes into a storefront or something. So I always try to think about beats in a visual effect shot and tell a bit of a story to make it more interesting. Now that the audience, I think, doesn't really fully appreciate that that's what's going on, but inherently they're entertained and they can follow along. And of course, ultimately, visual effects are there to serve the filmmaker's vision, which is really to tell a story. So how can you participate in that, or how can I participate in that and serve the story and the genre of the project that I'm working on?
Yeah, I can imagine those are challenges that are very, very interesting to deal with, and also really cool. And it sounds, you have a passion for filmmaking.
I do.
Obviously.
Yeah.
So I think that you're not just trying to get the technical challenges, you're trying to tell a story at the same time. I think that's a really important task.
And make things that are visually pleasing as well, right? Like it's
sure.
Palette is very important, and color and photography, and there's just a lot of different elements that go into filmmaking. And one of the joys of being a visual effects artist is I don't always get to design the shots from the ground up, but I get a lot of influence in them.
Right.
And I also try to allow my team to have a good amount of influence too. I think it's very important that people take ownership of things, and to that end, I think it's really an important part of my job is to really communicate the vision, ultimately the vision of the filmmakers, not my vision, but sort of our collective goal. Getting it all on the same path is critical, I think. But sure. Empowering people towards that goal so that they, nobody wants to feel like they're just pushing pixels, Everyone
right.
wants to contribute and do something cool, and I hope that I allow that to happen.
Yeah. I have an interesting question for you. Back when I used to be a supervisor and used to do things, one of the challenging things, especially when we're dealing with certain effects or fluids or things of that nature, is does someone, in a script or even the director or in whatever the treatment is, there's a description of something that's very vague or seems to be clear but is very difficult to interpret, mm-hmm. right? So, for example, I worked on a commercial where they said, okay, the sunroof opens on the car and a vortex goes in. And then, mm-hmm. so the term vortex, turns out there's a million ways to interpret that and what it looks like. Yeah. So how do you, have you met some of those challenges, and how do you sort of deal with that stuff?
Yeah. Yeah, the devil is in the details, really, right. And it's very important. Specificity is very important, and sometimes you don't get that from a director or a client-side supervisor, but you got to kind of roll with that because you got to work with what you got.
Right.
So I definitely try to lean on reference. I'm a big believer in reference, and I go on these hunting missions to find reference, and I like to put together like style boards, get like a whole collection of different images of something. So I don't know, if I was doing a vortex, I probably would search for vortex on Google and then grab a bunch of videos and images and, put together like a contact sheet sort of showing it all and just trying to figure out, well, what serves us to tell the story of this vortex entering the car.
Right.
So that's probably how I approach it.
Yeah, that's good. That's great advice. Great advice. I think that's another thing that we do a lot as visual effects people is we look at a lot of reference, and I think that reference is key to us making sure that we get things to look the way they do.
Yeah, I mean, we all make assumptions about our world, and sometimes, it's kind of like being a kid drawing, or being a beginning artist, like a 2D artist. You look at a kid's drawing and there's simple shapes and stick figures and things aren't really, the perspective isn't correct. But it's a representation of ideas that are in the kid's head, which is great. And it's great for telling a story, and certainly not everything needs to look realistic. But even as adults, we have certain ideas about the world, like how bright something is or how fast it moves or how big it should be. And sometimes we're just wrong. Like what we
Right.
think a thing isn't really what it is. So it's important to sort of always ground yourself, take yourself back to that reference, and remind ourselves of the way the world really looks, and particularly the way it looks in like a flattened two-dimensional space versus in the three-dimensional world that we walk around in.
Right. Right. I think that's great to talk about that. I have questions. I mean, you started off working on TV episodic stuff, right?
Yeah.
Way back in the day, and you mentioned those are quick turnarounds, very fast, doing them night shifts, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously you worked on some of the biggest films of the year,
Yeah.
the big tentpole films
Yes.
after that, and today you're working on also some I'm going to call it quote unquote episodic work because
Yeah.
the world has changed quite a bit in that area.
It sure
How
has.
do you having been sort of worked on the early days of episodic work and now seeing stuff like Stranger Things or Cosmos or you worked on another big one. Which one was that? It was The Nevers, right?
Yeah.
So how has that sort of changed, like in terms of the amount of work that you guys are doing, the scopes of these things?
Yeah, I mean the game has definitely changed. Streaming has and continues to redefine. It's really its own medium, a different genre now, when the biggest players in entertainment are now creating content for a streaming medium. HBO obviously, and Disney. All of the biggest players are out there are competing in a streaming world. So I would say that it lands probably now closer to the production cycles of features than it does the episodic world of yesterday. Certainly the turnarounds are nowhere near as quick. We're not doing day turnarounds on shots. I mean, I worked on Stranger Things for about a year, and we had like 220 odd shots at the end of the day. Now we weren't going flat chat for all of that time. There was definitely some ramp up and some development, and like the being in full production was probably more like 8 or 9 months or something. But you have a lot more time for sure, but not necessarily like the same budgets and therefore not the same resources as a full feature film. I mean, the last episode of Stranger Things 4, which was episode 9, which was the one that we had the most work in. We did about 100 shots in that episode. That was like 2.5 hours long, just that episode alone. So like
that's a feature
that's
film.
a feature film by itself, right? And
Right.
it wasn't just that there was 2 or 3 visual effects in it. I mean, there was, I don't know how many there are in that particular episode, but over the season of Stranger Things, I think it was something like 3,000 visual effects shots or something. It's huge. So it's really a game changer, and that really spans the gamut from invisible cleanup type effects work all the way to large scale destruction and environment work and creatures and
Yeah. It was interesting also hearing from a couple people who've been sort of doing the episodic world for so long, how the seasons have changed a little bit, right? The deadlines are different for episodic work because for streaming work more specifically, because they're not necessarily tied to the fall season opening and then the finale in the spring, you know, or whatever that is. So there's more somewhat more flexibility in terms of what you're doing, I'm assuming.
As far as like deliveries, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, that's true. I mean, so we Stranger Things released in 2 volumes.
Right.
So we sort of had 2 deadlines for this season. And one of the things that is that's quite different from the episodic of yesteryear was how quickly they can get new content onto servers, and therefore how late in the game you can actually deliver things. We were actually working on visual effects shots like the day before Volume 2 was released.
Oh, wow.
So really like how late in the game you can continue working on things has been a bit of a game changer. And if I'm candid, a little bit of a terrifying one, because there is something to be said for a deadline as a cutoff point to when the train stops. And those last few months they're pretty intense. A lot of hours and a lot of hard work, and happy to do it, and thought we did some cool stuff, but you can only do that for so long.
Right. I mean, it's interesting. I've heard similar things on feature films because back when I first started in visual effects and features, we're still filming things out onto film. They weren't doing digital projectors as much, right? Yeah. So I've been around for a little bit, but you had to. You had to be done like a month before the film comes out because they had to print all the reels, they had to ship them out to the theaters.
Yes.
And now your film is all uploaded to an FTP site.
Yeah, completely.
And so people are doing it a couple days before the movie is released. They're still working on some of these shots.
It's just wild. And I can sort of see that moving into like a paradigm where a show could continue to evolve. I think it's actually kind of a fascinating idea. I mean, I wouldn't really want to do it in the way that it was, say like the updates to Star Wars episodes, like 4, 5, and 6. Right, it went back and polished up some of the effects work in those re-releases. But I think it's kind of interesting from a storytelling standpoint that a show could be a living creature and evolve a little bit like a choose your own adventure sort of thing, where something new happens. Like you go back and you watch the same season, but it's changed, or maybe there's and maybe later on an audience could then navigate through those changes and you could make choices. It's kind of a fascinating idea, but I shouldn't suggest that because I might never sleep again. Yeah.
Well, it certainly does offer the idea of rewatchability, right? So you're not going to watch you're not necessarily going to watch season 1 of Stranger Things again, but if they had something important in it, or they added some parts of it that's important to season 4, then that could be an interesting thing, Yeah, for sure. Although the kids would have to get younger, which would be hard, but we can still. Yeah,
that's a real challenge in that show. Is you're fighting the aging process. Everyone's growing up super quick, and of course, we haven't really talked about it, but the pandemic, of course, played into all of this as well. I wasn't really in. I mean, we're all still kind of in a pandemic, I guess, but but it didn't affect me on Stranger Things the way it did during the Nevers, which actually like that shut down production, and we actually had to change the way we did some work on the Nevers based on the pandemic, because they had limited number of cast and crew that could work on shots. And so we had, for example, we created a digital environment where there was planned to be a set built, and we created crowds where there was supposed to be large numbers of extras and that kind of thing. But so it didn't really affect me directly in that sense on Stranger Things, but it did affect the production of Stranger Things because they were shooting it during that time. So that meant that it took a long time for between season 3 and season 4 on Stranger Things.
Right.
So yeah, that definitely has an effect.
Yeah. What are your obviously you're working from home. I'm working from home too, and this has sort of changed a little bit of what we do. How has that affected you, and have you been able to still feel effective doing what you need to do for where you are?
Yes. I think I've still managed to be effective, and maybe even more effective in some ways. It probably means that I work more than I should, because it's right there and I jump on and I can do that at 1 o'clock in the morning if I need to. And certainly when you're checking on renders, it can be a very helpful thing. I said earlier that iterations have a direct relationship to quality in effects work, and the ability to jump on at 2 o'clock in the morning or whatever, check a render and say, oh no, that's not working, let me just re-queue it. Or give a little bit more feedback to this artist, or and I've got people working kind of around the world, so sometimes they're in different time zones, so getting a little bit of feedback to somebody in Montreal late at night might mean that they can jump on that note early in their morning.
Right.
So I'm probably more productive from that standpoint. But as far as supervising and interacting with my team, it honestly hasn't changed so much for me, because the vast majority of my team are in other places in the world. Primarily Canada is where the vast majority of the team is for Stranger Things. And that's something that happened years ago, that there was tax incentives that popped up around the world, and studios and companies had to pursue those incentives because it makes huge financial sense. I mean, what we do is crazy expensive. The visual effects world, it's just mind-boggling the money that's spent on films in general, but certainly on visual effects. So we need to always try to figure out how to do more, faster, cheaper. Not even really in a race to the bottom, but just to produce like more content more quickly, because there's certainly a huge demand for content as well. So even when I was going into the office in LA, I was often video conferencing with teams around the world. We had this video conferencing system called iLine, and iLine was basically like Zoom, but where I could be in a theater and share a screen. In that case, it was actually like a real, full-size projector, a full-size screen, theatrical type screen, and I could see my team on the other side, of the video conferencing system, and they were in a theater looking at their cinema in Vancouver or Montreal, and we would work that way. So I was kind of used to working remotely and communicating like that. I spent a lot of time on the phone and sharing screens with people, and we use RV as a flipbook tool. So we are sharing RV sessions and writing up notes in ShotGrid, and so we had a lot of the tools to do that sort of remote work. anyway. And we were actually really
Right.
fortunate as a company because we were very well positioned for that. We work over a system called PC over IP, which is basically like remote desktop. And even when we were in the office, we were working that way. So we didn't actually have a physical workstation next to our desk. It was all in the server room, and we connect to it, over the Ethernet. And so taking your computer home is basically just taking a pod. The PC over IP works with a compression system. So we take that compression system and a couple of monitors home, and we're connected.
Right.
And I can work that way from anywhere around the world. I'm going to go to
Right.
Australia in a couple of weeks' time for a visit, and I'll have a system with me, and I'll be able to work from the other side of the world.
Yeah, I think that's really cool, and I think it's pretty interesting. You guys are doing that. Speaking of the pandemic, and also you mentioned Eyeline, I know, but you guys also have another branch of Scanline called Eyeline that is, focused on virtual production.
Yeah,
stuff,
Eyeline
right?
Studios. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I haven't had a lot of involvement with that personally, but yes, it's it's true. It's like we have it's an LED stage and volume capture system. We're really starting to explore the bounds of what's possible, and more starting to use that tech in productions of all sizes.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on specifically the virtual production? And obviously LED stages really started to just go booming during the pandemic. Everyone thought they were going to solve all their problems with LED stages. But what are your thoughts about virtual production and how that's going to affect things? And I know you're a big fan of iteration, and virtual production allows you to iterate in a much quicker way.
It does,
ways, right?
and you kind of get what you capture what you need in camera potentially, which is pretty amazing. Of course, you have to be ready to do that. So you kind of have to there's a lot more pre-production, I guess, involved in virtual production. But yeah, it definitely allows for a lot faster turnaround once you're on set. Obviously, you can control the environment, which is really critical. I think we're getting to the point where the real-time render engines are starting to be good enough that they could work as full digital environment replacements. So we set up with Unreal in our studio. That said, I think it also has its limitations. It never looks quite, to me at least, it doesn't look quite as good as a traditional visual effects shot just yet.
Yep.
I think it's very effective for certain types of photography. Probably the shots that were often done as visual effects shots, like car shots, people that are driving in a car and talking, where you can really have the reflections wrapping around the car, and you can control the sound and the lighting in that environment. I think it's very effective for that. I'm really curious about how augmented reality is going to converge or compete with that technology. I think it's really going to be a bit of a race to the finishing line there, because I see us getting into a world where augmented reality really allows us to invent imagery using, I don't even know what the tool sets are going to be. I mean, I sort of played around with Midjourney recently, the AI tool, it's fun. It feels a little bit like a toy right now, and I don't really feel like I have artistic control. I'm just sort of typing things in.
I think it's learning.
Yeah.
I think everyone's playing with it, and they're using that to teach it more stuff. So
yeah, could be, but you can certainly see that evolving. I can imagine a paradigm where if I'm trying to make a certain creature or effect, you sort of, it's almost like mad science. Remember in mad science when the the kids were trying to create their perfect woman, and they were feeding in things into the computer, like scanning.
Yeah.
Images.
Weird science. Weird
science. Yes.
Yeah.
And yeah, I can imagine something like that where you feed in, like I was talking about my style boards or my reference. Like if you feed in a whole bunch of reference to, to a data set, and then let the computer go wild and, start creating options, and you can create variants based on that, so.
Yeah, we were talking about it. It's the idea of like, how is things like these AI tools and Midjourney, obviously once they mature and evolve, how is it going to affect the worlds of concept artists and how that? And so I don't think it's going to replace necessarily concept artists, but it's certainly going to reduce the amount of time that we need to spend with them, because there's going to be some brainstorming that's going to happen through AI tools that are probably going to affect some of the decision making that I think is going to happen.
Yeah, I think it's just going to be an extension of the artistic process.
Sure.
Yes, it could certainly allow like lay people, like if you put in together a presentation or something, you just type something in, you can get an image that looks like what you want. But when you're really trying to create a certain type of look or effect, I think it'll just mean, like for example, you could take an existing plate and say, I want to relight the plate. I need to change the light so that it's on this side of the actor's face so that it works within my 3D environment or something like that. Or I want to change my environment or my background plate to look like, the way that the actors look. Like that's a challenge that I run into on a daily. And I think AI would be able to analyze the image and figure out how to recreate that lighting. I mean, deep fake is for sure going to be a game changer, right? Like digidoubles will quickly become a thing of the past once you're able to easily do a face or body replacement on a stunt person. I mean, there's limits to what stunt people can do too, of course, but But yeah, I think it's going to be a huge game changer, and there's a lot of excitement about virtual production. I think it's definitely got its merits, and it's another important tool. But I think the AI will also be groundbreaking and reinventing our industry in ways that we don't even know yet.
For sure, for sure. And you mentioned that it only looks so good in the certain areas of the real-time technology.
Yeah.
That's actually a problem that I've been trying to work with, because I think real-time is an absolutely critical thing, and I absolutely love iterations. But I'm working on trying to get some of the V-Ray and Vantage real-time ray tracing inside of Unreal, so that we can basically get a much closer look to things that would represent basically what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd love to see you guys do that.
By the way, Paul Debevic has sort of one of the things he developed at Google. He's actually at Netflix now, I think, but he's not.
As am I.
As are you. But he developed a facial relighting tool, so it analyzes the light of the of the thing, and then you can change the lighting, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's really cool. Well, listen, I don't want to take too much more of your time, but this has been absolutely incredible talking to you, Justin. I appreciate this. Congratulations on all the incredible work that you've done. And I heard that you guys got nominated for a VFX Emmy for Stranger Things. Is that correct?
Is that correct?
I don't know. I think it is.
I didn't get that memo. I think I did see a posting. I know that they were planning on submitting it. So I hope so.
I think it happened. Yeah. So we'll have to check after this. Okay. Otherwise, I'll have to cut this part of the podcast out if I was wrong, and I feel bad.
No, I think you're probably right, and there's a lot of awesome work that was done, both by us, but by a lot of other facilities that worked on it as well. I think it's just a fun show, and I can't wait to see what they do in season 5.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, Justin.
Thanks, see ya.